If you've been a lover of video games for any reasonable amount of time, you'll have been subjected to at least one of the obligatory award shows that takes place to cap off the year. One thing remains true: everyone loves to debate which game was the best that calendar year. Maybe you want to tell everyone why God of War Ragnarok stole the show, or maybe you want to showcase the many ways in which becoming an Elden Lord has changed your life. Or if you're an Xbox Ultra, maybe you're just fending off questions about why a Microsoft-owned IP hasn't been nominated for almost a decade. However, for every game cast in the spotlight, hundreds of games will have to endure the darkness that goes hand in hand with abysmal concurrent player bases. I am, of course, referring to the flops of the year. It's particularly common when it comes to RPGs. These games are so detailed, multifaceted, and often expansive that there are just so many profound and laughable ways that developers can go wrong. So with that in mind, I thought I would put together a precautionary list of the most disappointing RPG titles released in 2022, allowing you RPG fanatics out there to steer clear of any lackluster RPGs and use your time and money more wisely. Alright, enough talk, let's get the ball rolling. This is the most disappointing RPGs of 2022. Enjoy. In at number 1 we have Babylon's Fall. There is no other way I could start this list. It would be unfair to all those who follow, because no game this year flopped harder and faster than Babylon's Fall. This Square Enix and Platinum Games product caught more than a few eyes ahead of launch. The visuals looked stellar, the concept art looked interesting, and with the makers of Bayonetta behind the wheel, many must have thought, how could this possibly go wrong? Oh, poor naive gamers. Anything and everything can go wrong when it comes to modern AAAs. Babylon's Fall had a litany of problems, such as monotonous and boring gameplay, not too far removed from PS5 launch title Godfall. It had graphics that failed to match the Renaissance painting aesthetic promoted in the concept art for the title, and the story fails to expand on the strong core premise, leaving players with the obligation to complete a series of tedious quests just to see which terrible plotline will take over from the last. In the end, this would lead to the announcement that Platinum Games will be closing the servers in early 2023, rendering the game completely unplayable mere months after release. This is easily the fastest fall from grace I've ever seen with a live service game, and considering the game at one stage this year just had one concurrent player, it's hard to argue that the game was hard done by. Another swing and a miss by Square Enix, and that's becoming a bit of a trend. And at number 2 we have The Last Oricru. Now here's one that we reviewed a little while ago, but oh do we wish that we didn't. The Last Oricru is a game that, despite its poor reception, showed quite a lot of promise ahead of release. It had an interesting setting, promised a more narrative-driven Souls-like adventure, and also promised a branching narrative with that usual tagline, "Every choice matters." On the plus side, the choices do hold weight in this game, and the narrative is arguably the star of the show. It's just a shame that it's the best of a bad bunch. The combat within this game is pedestrian at best, and mind-numbingly boring at worst. The visuals are a generation behind the AA competitors out there. The UI and RPG elements of this game aren't intuitive or cohesive, making building your character more of a chore than it needs to be. Plus, even though the narrative is the highlight of The Last Oricru, even it begins to become farcical and disjointed as you power through the second half of the game. Overall, The Last Oricru feels like a playable checklist of RPG tropes done poorly, and the sooner we can all forget about this one, the better. And at number 3 we have Dolmen. I've seen a lot of games in my time that market their title as a love letter to H.P. Lovecraft. However, aside from perhaps Call of Cthulhu, and that is being generous, no game has ever been able to live up to their Lovecraftian promises. That remains the case despite Dolmen's efforts, or lack of effort depending on who you ask. This game aims to be a sci-fi horror adventure with a handful of RPG elements which culminate in offering another Souls-like adventure. This game shot for the stars, aiming to be a serviceable Souls clone like Mortal Shell or Remnant from the Ashes. However, it's more in line with games like The Surge or Lords of the Fallen, and that's not good company to keep. The game doesn't offer an interesting enough environment capable of replacing traditional storytelling. The nuanced built-in difficulty setting of Souls games is poorly replicated with huge HP bars and overpowered enemies who don't provide a fair challenge, but rather an artificial difficulty spike to overcome by tediously grinding XP. Plus, the game looks unpolished, and even at the time of writing has a litany of performance issues, and if they still persist now, chances are that they're here to stay. In short, Dolmen is a game equivalent of having someone draw on your back when playing Pictionary. The general outline is there, but the key details are nowhere to be found. And at number 4 we have Diablo Immortal. While this game is largely seen as a mobile game because it also runs on PC, I'm making the case for this one to take its rightful place on this list. While it's quite shocking to even see a series as prestigious as Diablo on a flop list, considering the downward trajectory of Blizzard over the years, it was probably inevitable if you think about it. Diablo Immortal takes everything that made Diablo a beloved and revered franchise within the RPG genre and then tosses it aside, presumably to make more room for microtransactions. Diablo Immortal takes the usual Diablo formula, strips it of all the nuance, offers nothing new to the series, and then puts a cherry on the top of this dog turd cake by making the entire game a pay-to-win experience. As a Diablo game, the title is mediocre at best, but with the addition of this nefarious money-grabbing system, the game only serves to tarnish the Diablo series' reputation. If you want to pour more money into this one, be my guest, but I'll be abstaining. Thanks very much. In at number 5 we have Stranger in Paradise Final Fantasy Origin. Well, if it isn't Square Enix stumbling their way back into view, only this time they're sullying the good name of their flagship franchise Final Fantasy. Now to be fair to them, this isn't a mainline title, but even a Final Fantasy spin-off is something that fans will happily break out the knives and pitchforks over if things go awry. So when Stranger in Paradise tumbled onto the digital storefront and was met with a lukewarm reception by fans and critics alike, I couldn't help but giggle. I mean, how many games is Square Enix going to send to the slaughter before they make a good game? Then I remembered Kingdom Hearts 4 is in their hands, and that's when the dread started to kick in. Would you believe that this game is another poorly made Souls-like? Who would have thought that replicating the groundbreaking titles from Software would be this hard? Everyone but AAA developers, it would seem. This game makes different mistakes from those previously listed, offering a patronizingly easy Souls clone with endless tutorials, routine combat, bugs aplenty, and a storyline that almost feels like a parody of everything that the series has done over the last 2 decades. The graphical fidelity is well off the mark, the main characters are to the story what the color beige is to the Dulux wall chart, and overall, it's another swing and a miss by Square Enix. Surely, that is the last time that we are going to be mentioning them on this list. In number 6 we have Saints Row. Another game that was dead on arrival in 2022 was Saints Row, a reboot that disappointed longtime fans and equally managed to guarantee that very few newcomers would be keen to invest in the Saints Row series ever again. Now, a lot of criticism leveled at this game was down to it not being GTA, and that's not fair. I'm not going to compare this game to GTA. However, I am going to compare it to any competent game that runs without issue in 2022, and based on that comparison, this game still flops pretty hard. Saints Row found its niche as a series by leaning into satire and becoming a zany, over-the-top title that many would refer to as a gaming guilty pleasure. However, it's jumped the shark and now we're laughing at it, not with it. The game has a short, underwhelming story, the game has more bugs than under a mossy rock in your garden, and worst of all, the humour produces some of the most cringe-inducing moments I've ever had the displeasure of enduring within my gaming career. I can sort of see the game being an enjoyable co-op experience in spite of its flaws, where gamers can laugh at its shortcomings as they make their way through. That's kind of what Far Cry 6 was for me. However, if you're a long-time Saints Row fan, this will be a really hard pill to swallow. And at number 7 we have The Waylanders. There are some games that pay homage to titles of old while creating something modern that drives the genre forward. Disco Elysium pays respect to 90s isometric RPGs, Stardew Valley enhances the Harvest Moon formula, and Overwatch galvanized a steel FPS genre at the time. Well, The Waylanders takes just about every cliche RPG trope in the book and instead of enhancing or tweaking them in their own image, ultimately decide to regurgitate or dilute the borrowed assets, biting off the corners of these puzzle pieces to form an RPG adventure that provides nothing new to the genre and underwhelms in just about every way. Is there anything worth praising? I suppose the attempt at creating an RPG world that centers around Celtic history and lore is something a little bit out of left field. However, if the game doesn't do this rich tapestry of history justice, then the praise is frankly unwarranted. To sum up, a weak narrative, a pedestrian combat system, characters as poorly written as a doctor's note, and a final product that is littered with bugs and performance issues. This is a classic bargain bin game, minus the bargain. In at number 8 we have Edge of Eternity. I almost feel a little bit apprehensive about putting this game on the list because of all those listed, this one is by far the least offensive. It's a game that suffers from a classic case of developers biting off more than they can chew, an ambitious game that suffers purely down to the over-eagerness to please. However, in the end, no matter how you arrive at that conclusion, this is still a bad game regardless. Edge of Eternity is a game that is chocked full of inconsistencies. Sometimes the game looks staggeringly beautiful, whereas in others it looks like a game that would be just about passable a decade ago. Equally, some aspects of the gameplay feel great, combat feels smooth, intuitive and rewarding, whereas aspects like crafting, upgrades, party compositions or lack thereof, and bland quests nullify the enjoyment that comes from fighting. However, there are some aspects of the game that are just plain awful. The story is about as generic as they come, the world feels hollow for the most part, and as a whole, the game just feels like it's trying to juggle too many mechanics, leading to a hodgepodge of ideas, none of which ever achieving their potential. In short, Edge of Eternity is a lesson to all first-time developers out there. Sometimes less is more. In at number 9 we have Vampire the Masquerade Swan Song. Vampire the Masquerade fans are a pretty patient bunch. After all, they've had to wait the best part of 2 decades to get this much sought sequel, so it must have hurt all the more that it turned out to be a rigid, unrefined and clunky mess. What has to be said about Swan Song is that it's clear that the writers had the best intentions for this game. You can't place the blame on the creatives in the writers' room because the interwoven lore, attention to detail and overall storytelling is pretty good. However, you can wrap bacon around a turd and it won't make it taste good. Swan Song is a game that offers inconsistent visuals, provides players with rigid detective-based missions that lack any form of emergent gameplay, and sees a lot of interesting ideas fall through the cracks. The gameplay is uninspired, the lack of combat within the game puts a lot of pressure on the narrative, which is stifled by the clunky gameplay and UI, and on top of all that, it sounds as if they pulled in people off the street to try their hand at voice acting. The real kicker is that fans deserved better. As this game stumbles over the line to no acclaim whatsoever, it's hard to see this series getting the modern entry that it truly deserves, and I only hope that Vampire Masquerade fans do get that modern sequel that they deserve in the years to come. And in at number 10 we have Valkyrie Elysium. No, it couldn't be. Oh, Square Enix, we have to stop meeting like this. What brings you here this time? Another underwhelming title? I should have known. We wrap up our Flop of the Pops chart for 2022 with Valkyrie Elysium, not to be mistaken with Disco Elysium, which is, in contrast, a very good game. It was bold of Square Enix to release a Norse mythology based title with God of War Ragnarok looming large, but then Square Enix isn't really in the business of smart calculated decisions now, are they? After an underwhelming outing in 2019 with Valkyrie Profile Covenant of the Plume, Square decided in vain to capture the magic of 1999's Valkyrie Profile, and in doing so failed miserably. Elysium fails to make the most of the move to more advanced hardware count, providing serviceable combat and very little else worth praising. The game comes out the gates at a brisk walking pace, but due to the reused quest format, lackluster storyline, oversaturation of combat encounters, terrible voice acting, and unintelligible UI, the game slows down practically to a halt. It's another RPG in this list that tries to sneak into 2022's RPG lineup to make up the numbers without actually doing anything of note to warrant its place in anyone's game library. Even the best sports stars have to play well consistently to get picked on game day, and based on Square Enix's recent form, they would find themselves dropping down the leagues pretty rapidly. But hey, who knows? Maybe Final Fantasy 16 will be good. Fingers crossed, everybody. So there you have it, guys, the worst RPGs that money can buy in 2022. There have been absolutely terrible games that came out in 2022, and I was personally fooled by more than one of these games listed, which still hurts me deeply. However, there are lots of RPGs that you should be playing, and plenty of RPGs that are scheduled for 2023, which will aim to absolve the sins of those listed here. Fingers crossed that it's all killer and no filler in 2023, and I hope this list does its job and helps you keep these terrible games at bay and out of your respective game libraries. As always, I've been Callum, and thank you for tuning in to RPG Informer. Take care.